salaries. one week.
Put it there, I don't know where you guys.
Yeah.
Your blood pressure.
Yeah, yeah,
is high,
yeah.
a lot of people get injured.
Yes, oh, yeah, yeah. I was lucky.
Oh, I should have bought that. Did Bill say how much he just wanted?
I think so.
Well,
I have no idea. He doesn't know.
it was interesting because it was I got it today, the new one. And we were just, up there, and then he said something about, he knew.
Chris, did you gotta go right there?
Well, because of Kevin.
In fact, go over
Maybe
there.
not dating like.
I guess.
I know, this is my, and what could I say, right? When my second oldest son just married his high school sweetheart.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not like you
You
see
lucky
the,
girl.
never works out type of.
Yeah, yeah.
Rose between two thorns.
He was.
Is it really what you older man?
Proud
Comfy cozy over
that
there.
she got 4 older
Sure did.
at UNH. Yeah,
Sure
UNH,
did.
yeah.
And he says all the time, well, you don't have an engineering major. If you had an engineering major, you wouldn't have 4 up. So, told her to be quiet, I bet she would.
Yeah, that's cool.
Sure.
All right. I think we're on.
Sit down. Where's Derek?
Derek, you good?
Is he on?
All right, awesome.
Oh, I will.
Okay, I will call the special Board of Ed meeting, the first budget workshop at 6:03. Please rise. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first up, we have public comment. Anybody?
Hi, my name is Jamie Bailey. My address is 15 Oriole Lane. I know you guys are discussing the budget, and I just really feel that you guys need to be putting more money into the special education system, especially at Chatfield Lopresti. My daughter was denied an appropriate education. I feel the way that they lied and didn't have any data was very wrong. That was their job. She has an IEP. That was very upsetting to me. So I, got an advocate, I'm going through it, and I will say Dr. Compton has been very helpful, and I thank her. And she is one of the main reasons that I haven't taken this to an attorney, which I don't wanna be that person, but I'm letting you guys know I'm a very upset parent, as I have a right to, because I am my child's advocate. You guys need to be putting more money into the special education system for data collection, because they don't know how to do their jobs and collect data. Also, you guys should be putting money into a fund, because my daughter's not getting the jab, not happening. So because the religious exemption is gone, she's gonna get kicked out most likely next year. And because she has an IEP, you guys are responsible for providing her with an education. So you guys are gonna have to think about all of the families who don't wanna get their children vaccinated for COVID, especially ones that have an IEP, because you guys are responsible for providing those children with an education. You guys really have to think about that, because I've talked to a lot of families who don't wanna do it, and it's gonna come down on you hard next year. I'm honestly trying to help you guys, I really am. I'm making you guys aware. The special ed department needs to do better. They need to learn how to do their jobs, and they need proper training on how to do an IEP, implement it, and how to collect data. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I actually wasn't going to speak, but I just wanted to back up her statement. Marlo, Verasher, Rivera, Equal Daycares. I do think that the special ed department needs to be looked at. I'm also a parent and an educator, and I've had a difficult time with my son's IEP implementation. Furthermore, I think that we need to staff the middle school, not sure if the high school has it, with reading and math consultants that teachers can consult with. I know that we did have them at one point, and then they were taken out of the budget, but I feel it's extremely important, especially after the pandemic, that they are put back in so that teachers can consult with somebody specialized in the content area.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Ma'am, I may have missed it. Would you identify the school where your child is?
Middle school, Seymour Middle School.
Thank you.
All right, any other public comment? Going once, public comment going twice, public comment 3 times. All right, public comment, the first is closed. Next up, Seymour Education Budget 22-23. I guess we're gonna turn this over to Sal. I just wanted to let everybody know, kind of like we've done in the past, if there's questions, I'm gonna write them down and provide your answer in a document and send it out to everybody, so this won't be the first time we meet, so we're gonna have probably some questions, so people don't ask the same questions who can't make certain things or whatnot, so.
I'll start out first with just an overview. Thank you, Board of Education members, thank you, parents that are here tonight. I would just like to start and tell you, again, this is the first working session, and next week, Monday, is the second working session, in which we'll be meeting at the Seymour Middle School. We're going to be having a PowerPoint presentation as a summit to kind of wrap up the suggestions, things tonight, and then also looking at Proposal 1, Proposal 8, Proposal 2, Proposal 3. I just want to also emphasize that it's very important tonight to tell you the story and to tell you a historical story, and I'm going to do that. But I also will tell you on next Monday night, we are going to showcase with a videotape about Seymour Public Schools. Our schools have been working very diligently to prepare this so that we can show the Finance Committee, the town, and just an ongoing video of support to showcase what Seymour is about and current programs and what's going on there, really to advocate for great things that are happening in our school system. We know we have room for improvement. That's ongoing. I would never say that we don't. But I'd like to just start out, first of all, I want to say, you know, Seymour Public Schools, it's been a legacy of excellence since 1884. The first public high school for Seymour High School was 1884. What's our vision for the future of Seymour Public Schools? We have to continue to be one of the premier school districts in the state of Connecticut. Look at the history of the school system and what you've accomplished. A legacy ongoing. Seymour School District has achieved academic accomplishments on all levels, starting with the elementary, middle school, and secondary levels. Think about all of the state championships in which Seymour has had a place in history, being an athletic and an academic powerhouse with several state championships, football, softball, volleyball, swimming, etc., state debate championships. I don't know, I may have left out some. I'm just telling you, looking and reflecting on the success story of this community is like no other in the valley. One of the most important priorities for a town, and you know this better than I, is the quality of the school system. Remember that our children are our #1 priority, and truly they deserve a world-class education. Also, I want you to know that special education is also dear to my heart, and I value each and every child. When you look at a school district, the most precious assets are our students, our staff, and our administration. I always say that from the boardroom to the classroom, that our students are always the Board of Education's top priority, and to the town as well. We know that our first select woman, Anne Marie, always values the Seymour Public School System as one of her top priorities. In a summative statement, please listen, as you all know and you support me well, we must have the appropriate budget from our town to meet the needs of our students to continue to provide the best education that we can provide each and every one of them. And when you look at the story and the historical story, you look, as many towns, actually the taxes have not increased much and salaries are going up everywhere, insurance costs, and let's just call it like it is. You want to recruit the best staff, the best teachers. That's where the rubber hits the classroom, whether it's regular classroom, special ed, related arts, whatever it might be. And when you look at the history of Seymour, and I found these old documents going all the way back, in 2004-05 was the only 5.2 increase in the history of Seymour schools. What I've noticed is that some years, basically staying within the 2% and sometimes even lower. There were a few years there was 0%. And as things increase, basically we haven't always done that. Again, economic development is crucial to a town, but the quality of the education system is right there with it. So now I must tell you the story of what we have uncovered, which most of you know individually. Now I want to bring it out in the public. At this time, I must publicly share that we have a deficit situation in an area in which there were miscalculations of fringe benefits, and it involved the configuration of figuring Anthem insurance costs as well as with MRF, which is a retirement. And this came from last year's budget, and it was in an estimated amount of around $800,000. I think more specifically it was $839,000. So, and this was done by a former business manager who did last year's budget for this current year of 2021-22. Please understand that this was uncovered by our new business manager in doing an internal audit of the accounts and budgets. And understand as well, I did talk with our former business consultant. He was aware, he did feel like he knew there was a at least $700,000 deficit in regards to fringe benefits, but he didn't go forth with it. I just want you to know this is something that we can fix and we have to move forward. You as a Board of Education, you had no idea that this was going on. You didn't know until we told you. I didn't know until he shared with me. I suspected something was wrong because at many meetings, the business consultant would always mention $700,000. So here's where we are. Just looking at employee benefits, this represents a 2.2% of the 3.6 increase for the new year. So what we're saying, it's called catch-up. Catching up from the past of this past year and then moving forward planning for this year. The remaining increase is a result of a projected increase of 12% in health insurance benefits with Anthem. And this is for about any place you'll go in Connecticut. With certain insurance companies, you're seeing the premiums go up. So if it was just this FY budget alone, it would be 4.5% we would go in asking for. And all of this is addressed on the very first page in this document, and now Mr. Salvatore Bucci will go into more detail. I just want you to as we review all of this, he's going to come tonight and say a certain percentage to ask the town. We will present next Monday night, okay, one plan and other two backup proposals. And I just want to share that with you. When you get into budget cuts, any place would tell you, when you get into really very serious cuts, you look at attrition, but you don't hurt programs as less as possible. So this is where we are. This is the true facts. We've always put everything on the table. That's who Seymour is. And you just had a person who just made a serious mistake. And, it is what it is, we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gunther. On the first page of the budget summary, I'd like to dovetail off of what Dr. Compton showed in the history of budget increases. This problem really seemed to manifest itself in the 2021 year when there was a 1.5% increase in the overall budget, but there was a 2.1% increase in the actual spending. And then for this year, there's a 2% increase in this year's budget, but we're running at a 4.3% increase based on our actual expenditures. For next year, we're looking at essentially what is a 6.9% increase in the budget, of which only 4.5% would actually get spent next year. The other 2.3%, which is the 800,000 change, represents the correction that we have to fill. And what I mean by the correction we have to fill is, this whole issue relates to employee benefits. Employee benefits, if you take $800,000 of a problem we're dealing with this year, and then you add 12% increase in health insurance premiums, which we're estimating, and the town is also estimating the same percentage because we're both on the same policy, you wind up adding another $400,000 to your overall costs. You wind up at a $1.2 million problem, and your $1.2 million problem essentially makes up a 2.3% of your overall increase just to get you current so you can make your premium payments. The keys to the 4.5% increase are a new teacher contract under which salaries essentially increased across the board between 3 and 3.5% depending on the step and grade. Now, the great news is we have a lot of experienced teachers, but they also happen to be at the very high end of the step scale and at the very high end of the salary scale. The second component to this is largely a 12% increase in employee benefits. This district has roughly $23 million worth of underlying salaries. We have $7 million of employee benefits, fringe, and taxes on top of that. Out of this $37 million ask, almost $30 million of it is our personnel. So when you look at what the crux of the budget is and you start looking in areas of discretionary spending, we have very little. We have essentially in this budget on top of $30 million, $2 million for a bus contract which has to be renewed, which essentially in this budget is flat. You have another $2 million in there roughly for special education. You have $1 million in there more or less for utilities. Now you just added another $5 million on top of your $30 million, you're at $35 million, so what's your discretionary spending? $2 million. It's very hard to find meaningful money when you only have $2 million to work with, which by the way includes instructional books, technical supplies, other things you need to advance the educational mission. So at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is how painful is it going to be able to come within a number that essentially is less than 6.9%. Now, when you look at, to Dr. Compton's point of view, say levels of attrition, there's a certain amount you can do, but I want you to consider, based on the facts, and I will answer any question and I will stand behind every one of these numbers, because this budget was built from the ground up. It is based on a per person calculation. There are no broad strokes. There's no magic. There is no smoke and there are no mirrors. Okay, it's really what it is. I can take you through very quickly. There's a ton of data in here. The first couple of pages, essentially you'll see a comparison of this year's budget versus last year's budget. You'll also see a comparison of this year's budget versus this last year's spending, which is where we are right now. For the sake of reference, I've thrown in the 2018, 19, 19, 20, and 2021 years, budget versus actual, to essentially show how those budgets actually worked out based on where they started and where they ended. You get into certified staff and non-certified staff. Again, for every object category here, I'm providing you with information relating to the 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, 21-22, and 22-23 years. So you can see the progression of spending against not only the budget, but also against rising costs as it relates to prior year. It's not, it shows a steady increase, which one would expect, because year after year, even if you're in a no inflation zone, which we were in for many years following the recession, in the middle part of the teens, cost of living was essentially flat, but teachers got paid more money because they had contracts and their salaries went up, which is understandable. And in fact, the jobs probably just got a lot harder in the last few years because of COVID and the burden. So it is a worthy expenditure on behalf of the town. There are then a couple of pages in here that essentially will show you what I was talking about earlier, which is how you arrive at the total cost, total compensation costs, how much relates to salaries for contracts, how much relates to health insurance, employer costs. We roughly provide 88% of the benefit. The employees pay roughly 12% on average for their health care plan. There are contributions to HSA plans, and then there are taxes. When you skip past essentially the individual compensation data, I want to get you to the page where we're talking about employee benefits, because again, not to really harp on this, but you'll find a very cogent schedule in here that talks about what the key drivers are behind the increase of $1.3 million that is going from fiscal year 22 budget to the fiscal year 23 budget. Again, 449,000 of it relates to the year-over-year increase, and 839,000 relates to essentially the miscalculation, if that's the word, of how we got to this year's budget and the deficit that we're running this year. It's not reasonable to expect that we're going to have much less than a 12% increase in the insurance anthem. During the townwide budget summit, projected 10 to 15%. So we struck a chord, we put it in the middle. Last year it was 8. It's everybody's guess. Obviously, we'd all like to see the lower number, but I don't know if it's realistic to really expect less than 12%. COVID has put a tremendous burden on insurance companies, and they are obviously trying to recoup that money. There are tons of detailed schedules. There really are not other categories in this budget that are showing any types of increases at all. Special education is being held based on the fact that we have roughly the same number of students in the district this year that we are anticipating having in the district next year. And as everyone knows, your special education expenses are statutory, and we do the best we can with trying to recover, as much as we possibly can through grants. Aside from that, there really is not in here anything else other than a couple of things I broke out. The way our supplies category works in here is it actually contains electricity and heating oil or heating fuel. So for your reference, I broke those out separately so you could look at those individually, and it's almost, the page is all the way toward the end. And you'll see one page where it says electricity, and it shows count 622. We discussed this at the last finance meeting, I believe it was, finance committee meeting, and I'll bring it up again. We're projecting electrical usage charges based on an escalation rate of 3% over a baseline year beginning in 2019, with a 3% increase every year, to the extent that we have savings that result from the installation of solar panels on several of the schools, we remit those savings against the bond that was floated to pay for some of those solar panels. Ideally, over a period of time, those solar panels are going to generate some return money, but it is not within the next 10 to 15 years based on what I can see. So we just need to be mindful that, we're in an environment here where, electrical usage charges, or we're at the mercy of Eversource and what they decide to do. All the schools have been converted to gas, so we may begin to see some savings as a result of that, but this is our first year, and so far I can't reasonably project what that might be. I sat with Tim Connors, and we just don't have enough data yet. Aside from that, there is nothing of any consequence in here that would represent an increase of any magnitude. We've tried to cut back on any discretionary spending. For instance, the budget we have for repairs and maintenance for the schools, it's bare bones. This year we had roughly $82,000 worth of unanticipated expenditures. Compressor blew up, a boiler went bad. Things happen, especially, say, for instance, in Funway where the school is aged and things tend to break in aged buildings. So every principal has a wish list of things that they'd all like to do to their schools to improve their schools. And what we put together essentially is a repairs and maintenance budget that says we're going to be dealing with HVAC repairs and maintenance, which typically occur every year, and so we've allocated a certain amount of money for every school, roughly $25,000 for each school. We also have some repairs and maintenance projects for each of the 4 schools that essentially are safety type issues, maybe repaving a parking lot or doing some things that need to be done, because what we've been trying to do is to hold the line on necessary, I wouldn't say unnecessary, but I would say on non-emergency type expenditures, so that we can captivate as much of the remaining budget we have for this year, so we can help to mitigate the deficiency we have this year, while we at the same time try to make sure we don't carry this deficiency forward, which is the reason why we have a 6.9% budget increase. So that is, I think, as much as I believe is relevant at this point in terms of the overall picture, and I'm open, obviously.
Let me just mention too, it was kind of like the dream list that the principals put together, initial request, that was placed in the tab, actually it's under tab 4. Technically, after we had a heart-to-heart talk of exactly what we were dealing with this miscalculation issue, they really just basically joined hand in hand and said, we'll do whatever we can do to get through this and make it work. Out of all of this, like I said, it's truly a dream list. It's something that if we were financially where we would love to be, or extremely wealthy district, there's a lot of things in here that would be fabulous. One recommended a new math coach, a literacy coach, basically like you're talking about with consultants. One of the situations too that we are going to need to have is definitely a manufacturing teacher at the high school, because out of the proposals and the initiatives that we've talked about at the high school in that situation, they will be looking into grants. I'm not sure Mr. Tuttle can get any grants for us, but that's an area that we will need a manufacturing teacher there. Basically, out of all of it, it's kind of that in a nutshell when it comes down to what the principals agreed, basically just to say, whatever Dr. Compton we have to do. One of the things we are going to have to talk a little bit about a capstone coordinator at the high school. That's very important, that's crucial. We talked about that and the value. But when you really look at where we're at, like I said, they are willing basically to just kind of be status quo, try to keep very much what they have, except maybe looking at attrition as, the worst case scenario. So that's kind of where we are. We do have the individual requests that each of them did. We met with them. They were very diligent in the process. We've got to make sure that we have, first and foremost, the instructional materials that all of our kids need, and that's a priority. We did purchase $200,000 worth of additional computers from the last ESSER grant. Now, what we'd also like to bring to you is a clearer picture of the ESSER grants. Mrs. Tenza also put that in, this is under, basically under section 7, right, Ms. Tenza? So, in regards with that, that's something we'll talk more in depth about what was spent with ESSER funds, the first grant, the second. And we kind of did a really nice summative there in the back. Some of these people in the second grant were, the first grant were just 1 year only during the worst part of COVID. So that situation, those people we will have to let go. Then you look into the other type of ESSER grant about continuing on with certain other positions. So one of the things too, that was mentioned to me today, I think the town also would like to know, what do we really have in ESSER funds left? And technically, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bucci, I think we're talking $1.7 million in the last ESSER grant, is that right? Ms.
And the
Smith?
ESSER 3.
ESSER 3.
Yeah.
And so technically, everything needs to come out to the surface, show everything. I think First Select Woman would like to see this as well. We had one point talked about an HVAC project. We don't think that's going to be possible now. It's an HVAC project for the high school in Tubage. Maybe just the high school, maybe not at all. But it's just something to put out there. It's something that will need to be prioritized by you as a board. I think due to the deficit situation, we need to just hang and not spend anything right now. But we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
Dr. Compton,
Yes.
I've been on the board 14 years. Ed is a veteran, Kristen is a veteran. We have essentially 4 hurdles that we need to overcome insofar as any school budget is concerned. Number 1 starts here. We have to approve it. Then it goes to the Board of Finance. Hurdle number 2. They have a chance to whittle at it. And if they do, then we have to come back and take another look and make some very difficult decisions. Hurdle number 3, the town itself, the Board of Selectmen and the Select Woman have to be satisfied that the town, let's say, tenor of the town is acceptable to a valid, and I'm going to use quotes around that, Board of Education budget. The 4th and final hurdle, the largest, the most difficult, are the voters. We go through this on an eternal basis. We never know whether it's going to be feast, famine, or absolute starvation. And then we have to take and make the cuts that really destroy any system when they cannot receive what is necessary to provide the education for all the students. We don't generate money, just as the federal government doesn't generate. But the federal government, there's a big difference here. They can reach into every one of our pockets and take what they need. And we can moan and groan, but we can't do very much about it. Nor can we do very much about a town that is unwilling to sustain the educational needs of its community. I see, I may be taking more time than I should, but I see, given the current circumstances, given the inflation that's, you hear about it every day, and that is hitting people, in
Yes.
Seymour particularly.
Absolutely. I
So-
totally agree.
So it becomes increasingly more difficult to convince people, look, you have to toughen up. You have to bite the bullet. You have to go forward regardless of whatever pain it may mean to you personally. That's not a good selling point. And if I were to read the temper of this town, I would say, they tell me to go take a hike. Or they tell all of us, go take a hike. I'm not going to support that budget. So, given, yes, there are grant monies out there, yes, we can let people go, we can reduce staff, we can reduce programs and so forth and so on. But in the final analysis, we are subject to the community whims, and there isn't much anybody's going to do for us. Once that vote is made, we've gone through numerous votes on the budget. Sometimes we were lucky, and other times we were not. So I'm fearful. I'm expressing my solitary opinion as a member of this board. I'm very concerned. I'm very attuned to the two parents who have spoken about the special ed budget. I don't know what we're going to do.
I know, and you know, I listen and I value your judgment and guidance very much. And as you all have expressed to me, the process with this budget, even as I was taking this job, what all that is involved. And it's in regards with this process. And I totally think what you've said, that we're in for a very tough situation, and it may be back to the situation that it may be just bare bones of what we're dealing with.
Well,
And we
we have
can't
to look.
be prepared.
If I may, just
Yeah,
to
no.
conclude what my thoughts were, this 6.9%, that really is what we need, right? As, to move
With
forward.
To
everything,
keep the status quo.
what they currently have.
But to keep the status quo, but also take care of the deficit.
Oh, yes, yes. You
That's
need
my big point.
4.5% to fund the district
Where
next year.
do we go if we don't get that? That's the big question. Where do we go? What happens to all of us as individuals if there is no remediation for that problem?
And
That's
that,
a personal concern.
So I'd like to build on what you were saying, recognizing that the 6.9% is a budget over budget increase, it's not a dollar amount over dollar amount increase. But when we talk about needing, whatever the sum, I'm gonna round it to 800,000, because I think that was said, where we talk about the idea there were 800,000 in the hole. We all know that we can't wait until next year's budget to fill this year's $800,000 hole. So could you talk a little bit about the mechanics of how that's gonna happen, so maybe we can parse things apart for both the Board of Finance and community?
Part of that, I'll be perfectly honest with you, at this point, to me, is unknown. It's taken me, I think I'm probably coming up on a 3-month day here. It's taken me this amount of time to actually get my arms wrapped around exactly what the problem is. What we've done in the process is we've attempted to isolate a group of ideas, things that we could pursue. For instance, we want to look at these grants and make sure, like, for instance, you have custodians doing a yeoman's job of keeping these schools clean like they've never kept these schools clean before. Primarily because of Omicron, primarily because of the battles we're fighting with COVID, and I want to make sure that we are allocating costs that we're incurring in the LEA to a grant, if that grant was specifically designed to help us to alleviate these extra costs that we're incurring. I read in the newspaper just the other day, I live in Milford, my counterpart in Milford is taking it upon himself to essentially do just that. He's cleaning his schools, he's using grants, he's basically trying to isolate costs that can be allocated because we're in this situation where we're experiencing increased costs relating to that. It's a function of freezing expenditures.
I don't want to cut you off, but as I'm thinking of what my question was, I'm realizing that my question was not really accurate. Because we're not saying that embedded in that 6.9% is $800,000 for this year. We're saying that that 6.9% catches us up to the $800,000 we were missing this year. How that $800,000 is going to get made up for this year is what is the current unknown. The
Right.
6.9% is if we had the $800,000 in this current year budget that we should have had, then it's a 4.5% on top of that.
Right.
So I'm actually,
That's correct.
that's,
Very
you
well
know,
said.
I'm really familiar with this, and I even
Yeah.
walked away from the conversation thinking, wait a minute, we want $800,000 in next year's budget to plug this year's hole, but that's not what it is.
No, it's not, that's not what it is.
So really, we don't know how we're gonna plug the hole of $800,000 this year. And next year, to do an apples to apples, we're really asking for a 4.5% increase, spend over spend, but it looks like a 6.9% budget over budget. I actually had to say that aloud, but we should be careful with that phrase of plug the hole.
Yes.
Okay,
Because
so
that sounds
let
like
me-
we're taking from this year and plugging this.
Yeah, so if we look at it like this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if something costs $1 and we've budgeted 80 cents for it, the next year it's $1.20. So we're not asking for 40 cents, we're asking for 20 cents, but when you look at 80 versus 120, right, that's the 4.5.
That's
And
I mean,
Yeah.
the dollar to 120 is the 4.5, the 80 to 120 is the 6.9.
Now, and if you look at what I was saying in the beginning, in fiscal '21, the employee benefit actual expenditures were $550,000 over budget from what was budgeted in that year. So when you under budget for this year, you didn't solve the $550,000 problem, you just added to it. And then you had $800,000 problem. And then if you add another $400,000 to it next year, now you have a $1.2 million problem. And if you don't solve the problem, then all that happens is the amount of your deficit continues to grow year after year after year. If you apply a 6.9% increase to this budget, what you would say is, okay, we gotta solve the $800,000 problem for fiscal '22 that we're in now, between now and June. But we would start next year on July 1 knowing that we have enough money to pay the employee benefits for fiscal '23 because we are now properly funding the budget for the amount of cost that it's going to take for us to get through the year. That's hopefully a clarification, and really to what Kristen was saying, that is really, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. We're trying to stop the avalanche and the ball getting larger as it rolls down the hill. It is not a problem that it was invented this year. It was exacerbated this year, okay? And it was exacerbated because a year ago at this time, when the exercise that I undertook was being done, the then running $550,000 deficit was apparently ostensibly ignored because it was never considered in the course of coming up with a budget number for this year.
You didn't receive the true calculation
So-
for percentage.
And I look back at this, and I look at the relative costs over the years, and it just seems to me that, and the other component too, by the way, is the increase in the municipal employee retirement fund, okay, there were percentages increase, it was about a 1.5% increase just this year on total payroll, okay? And there's apparently no control over what the state decides to do with that. they do whatever they want, and then the employer makes the payments, and it's statutory, and you have to put your people in, otherwise, I mean, there are towns that have run afoul of this, and I wouldn't want to be one of those towns. So, when you calculate out the cost of employees, it's critical, and that's why I did it this way, it's critical to look at what the total cost is. The salaries, fringe benefits, and whatnot run anywhere from 25 to 30%, sometimes even more, depending on the salary scale. An employee who is getting family coverage will disproportionately affect your budget if, as they have a lower salary, it's still the same load to carry the family what we pay, okay? If you have someone with single coverage, obviously, that has the opposite effect, it's much to your benefit. We don't have anything in place, and nor can we put anything in place with the contracts that we currently have that would help us mitigate that by trying to transfer costs off to, say, another district by saying, well, if your spouse has insurance, they have to take their insurance elsewhere, this is going on in places. The problem with that game is you don't want to be the last person standing when this happens, because then you're holding the bag on everything. So, again though, it's a critical benefit for teachers and people who work in a school district to get these benefits, because, that is part of the calling. That I'm going to take care of your children and you're going to take care of me. And so, and I have teachers in my family, and they're very dedicated, and frankly, for years, I always thought they worked a lot harder than I ever did for less money. And so I have tremendous respect for what teachers are doing in the district, but I'm a finance guy at heart, and I'm trying to figure out how to balance the budget.
I would just like to add back to what you said, Jim, in regards looking at waterways, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to address cuts, and how can we remedy this situation based upon what we might not be able to get? And one of the things always, as you all know, you look specifically at federal funds. You look currently at Title I. You look specifically, again, in regards to what areas that somebody from a regular district budget could be picked up by another federal fund, or absolutely what would have to go and be cut first. As I mentioned, attrition, we have 3 people retiring, staff members, we also have a secretary, possibly 2, that's 5 people, that's attrition. Just looking at those people, that was in the amount, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Salvatore, was around for $350,000 for three staff members.
Exactly.
And then the 2 possible secretaries, it ended up being around $450,000. Yeah, $450,000. That's just one area. You also look, the reason I mentioned ESSER's just a Band-Aid. It wouldn't last past 2 years. And I think that's into regards to what, Jim, you're talking about. How on earth, Dr. Compton, are you going to fix this issue? If they get down and they won't say 5, or they won't, whatever it may come out. You start again too, you look specifically at seniority, you look at the situation, what's in the ESSER grants, specifically was a media specialist for the middle school, high school. It could go out for a while because accreditation's not to 2027. I know that's a mark and all that situation, but it doesn't come back to 2027. Possibly you've got somebody certified in the high school as well that could also step in. I'm not sure, I'm just brainstorming. But when you look, those are the first things you start looking at because they were in grants. That area is one area. Also a floating nurse. A floating nurse is another area in a situation that could be cut. When you're looking down the list, person by person, also there's an assistant special ed director that is funded right now by a specific IDA grant. Last year it was ESSER, this year it was brought up in a specific IDA. I mean, I'm just talking down to the bare basics here, folks. If you're asking me how can we fix the problem and how would we address cuts, attrition is always number 1. Number 2, you look at grants and you look and see what other people within your district could you put there. There's another situation, just looking specifically in Title I. You look at the amount of possible tutors, and specifically, you also look at what we had in before, which will go out, the long-term substitute teachers. They're to go out this year anyhow, they were a part of ESSER. So you really just got to look at specifically where do you cut first in the bare bones of what you have. So that's what I would have to do and come back and present and have in regard, because we already looked at attrition, trying to bring it down to 5%, just to be very honest with you. And then just looking, what if they cut more in regards, what can we absolutely let go and try to not hurt children and still keep programs in place. And it's not easy, and that's how come I didn't want to speak about ESSER funds, but it's kind of like, okay, can we hold a year to get out of this deficit situation? What can we do? But with ESSER 3 funds, this grant's going to have to be revised, because the big portion was for infrastructure, and you get into HVAC systems and that type of thing. We would have to find the right type of thing that would be legally inappropriate to revise the grant. But I think that's something we have to look at as well. But again, that's just a certain amount of money, and it only goes so far. And it's a Band-Aid approach for a year or two. So
Every time we undergo this procedure,
yes,
I think of the myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if everyone knows who he was, but he was a mythological creature who offended the gods. And his penalty was to roll a boulder up a hill, but never succeeding to place that boulder at the top. When he thought he was there, down it went, and he had to start all over again. So, excuse me if that comes to my mind whenever we undertake something like this.
great analogy.
I'd just like to point out one thing too. You know, when going through this analysis, the thing that jumps off the page at me is last year there was a budget increase of 2%. I believe it was predicated on the fact that the school district had experienced a decrease in its overall expenditure base as a result of COVID, as a result of school closures, as a result of savings. When you look at the budget, for instance, for certified staff, and you see last year, you got a 0.4% increase in teachers, in certified staff budget. You had a 1.5% increase in the actual expenditures. This year, your change is 4.2% on your budget, and that is to accommodate a 4.8% increase in the teachers' salaries, because now you're running at full steam. The fundamental problem, one of the underlying fundamental problems of this budget is the distortion in the budgets for the prior couple of years as a result of COVID. And the fact that it was possible to sort of put 2% out there and put 1.5% out there in the year before and get by. And then all of a sudden, you open the spigot and you turn up in the schools, and then you have all these other expenditures, and then you're dealing with all these things you have to deal with, and you found yourself without a rainy day fund. There wasn't enough in the cupboard to basically pay for the things that you didn't deal with, or that or the idea that you didn't deal with the rising costs. The costs didn't just skyrocket. They are back to normal, or at least, and you know, to your point about inflation and the burdens on people, that's true. But the same burdens are existing in the school district. And what has happened now is, it's kind of like you're driving the old jalopy, and then it finally gives out, and you gotta bring it in for repairs, and the guy says it's gonna cost you $2,000 to fix the car, and unfortunately, in this scenario, you can't switch cars. So, you know, this is kind of how it looks to me, and, you know, I have a different perspective. I have not been at this like you've been at this for years, fighting this battle. I'm just trying to hopefully give you a perspective that maybe the people in the town will look at it and say, it's time to make an investment in our children, and we realize the pain, but that's not for me to say. I'm not a voter in this town, and I no longer have children in school, although I do appreciate the argument.
Transportation is another area. We know we're going to get back some savings from the bad situation that we went through this year. Everybody's encountered it, been a piece of the issue of the bus runs, buses not running, and parents even bringing their own kids to school at certain times and combined runs. I'll have to say All-Star here the past month's really done a really much better job. I want to commend them for that. But again, we're supposed to get funded back monies on where they didn't do these runs. So again, just looking at that, we know the transportation contract is up and has to be decided upon. Again, looking at the runs, we started out with 12 runs and then it didn't, with all the situations with not having enough bus drivers and maybe looking at runs, we talked about the community stops, that was a big issue. One of the things that Mrs. Tinson just mentioned here was the possibility of looking at maybe just doing a combination of, you want to say that, two?
Just at
Just
one point.
something to think about.
Nothing's popular, but at one point, the district, when I first got here, had said that when enrollment had dropped a little bit more, that they could look perhaps at 2 start times instead of 3. So you have an elementary start time, and then there'd be a compromise between the middle school and high school start time, so that you could kind of condense those runs as well. So it's just one more thing that we perhaps could look at.
One thing,
I thought our elementary schools did start at the same time.
No, they do, but we have an elementary start time, a
And
middle
then
school start time,
as
and a
a-
high school start time.
Oh, I think you said compress to 3. You said compress from 3.
Yep.
Yeah, got it.
so the other situation, we've, condensed some runs as it is, and we're hoping that the contract in regards that we're not gonna have a big increase, it should be decreasing with what we went through, but we don't know.
All right, so, any questions? A lot of quiet faces. I mean, at some point, we're gonna have to make a decision on which budget we're presenting to the town next week, is it? On
Yes,
the
Monday.
second?
You'll have all the other two.
We're presenting on Thursday.
Yeah, I know,
Oh,
but
next Monday.
next Monday night, we'll have the other 2 board members that weren't able to be here tonight will be here. And we'll bring them up to everything that we've covered here tonight. And the one's already received the notebook, the other one's out of town. But we'll share everything. I think what you're expecting from us is what some other scenarios is in regards that would deal with these percentages, in regards to have the different proposals in regards with the town.
This is just me speaking. My preference is not to have other scenarios, because this is a confusing story to understand. And I feel like if we start introducing 2 or 3 different if-then scenarios, if the budget got cut by this, we would have to make these kind of cuts.
Yes.
I feel like we're a bit premature for that.
Okay. I think that's good judgment. I'm just trying to say, down the road.
But I'm just one person for next Monday.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And, it's, when we walk out, hopefully everybody, the majority will agree on a budget that we wanna present. If it keeps getting, knocked down and knocked down, education is our #1 priority. And to get a budget passed, like Jen said, the last step is the voters. And the people who are going to come out and vote for this are going to be your staff in town and your parents in town. And hopefully everybody at this table. When you start to really strike the nerve is the extracurriculars. and I would never say that's something we would wanna cut. But if you start throwing that out there, that's when people start to talk.
That's gonna cause a problem.
As
You
a,
talk about
I don't think we
sports.
should- we should- My personal feeling is, we've gone various scenarios in the past, you know? I think we should just go with it, don't say, you know, this will happen if, the if then, no. I think we ought to stay away from that, one man's opinion, stay away from that, this is what we need. We have to make a decision. When the questions come, then we answer.
well, right, yeah, at that point.
I would like to see, I'm
So
sorry.
just grab Ms.
I
Bruno.
just want to speak, I'm an early childhood person and I'm a special educator. And across the state and in other districts, we're dealing with making some corrections to prior budgets. In other districts and across the state, they're dealing with increasing need of their population, and increasing costs for mental health, for special education. And so I think that I'm concerned when I hear attrition, when we know there's a school psychologist retiring. I think we have, keeping kids at the center of this budget, we have to be very careful that we can anticipate there are gonna be increasing needs based on the pandemic, which for the 3 and 4-year-olds that I work with has been their entire life at this point.
And that was the purpose of ESSER funds, part of it.
But this is long-term, this is not just going to be once the masks come off, that, you know, we hope that they do someday, but this is something we're going to have to address as a school system to do the best for kids, so we have to keep that in mind.
I'm just gonna, you had a point, Sal?
No, go ahead, Kristen, I'll wait.
I want to clarify to Kristen's point, the budget that we're seeing in front of us now, while we know we do have retirees, they are all being replaced in the current budget,
Yes,
right?
yes, they
Okay,
are.
that's good to know that we can
Yes, that is
definitively
a
say
current
that.
budget. Yes, it is.
But what this budget also does not do is speak to the increasing needs by adding. However, the opportunity is there to do that if we rejigger the ESSER 3 grant application, but only for
A limited period of time.
a limited period of time. And when we talk about 2 years, it's this current year and next current year, or is next current year and the year after?
Yes.
This one runs out in 24.
Okay, so that's, what the town is gonna, like, to the extent that, well, not to the extent, for the $800 plug for this year, really our recourse is mostly ESSER for that, which was not the intent of ESSER.
Right.
And we actually might have some trouble with that, because you can't use ESSER to supplant what
You can't.
should have been operating
That
budget.
is
You have to be very
exactly
careful.
correct, and
Which-
it would have to be appropriate.
Which
placement.
gets us into what I know you don't wanna talk about. Can I go there?
Go there. I'm curious, go there.
Yep, go ahead.
It's been brought up in meetings before,
Yeah.
so it's not like it's, I mean, we have to address the electricity and the solar. And we have given money back to the town that by all rights, they should now give back to us because we're 800,000 in the hole. And,
So, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Because I don't actually have a problem discussing anything.
but can I just clarify for the people in the room?
Yes.
I
so-
wasn't asking them to discuss it because we wanna hide it. I was inquiring about that because it's so darn
Confusing.
complicated and
Very
confusing. Yes, so that's,
Well, and it also goes to what many of us who were here at the time heard,
yeah,
and then in subsequent meetings, heard differently, and then we got a contract that nobody could read, maybe Beth could read it. And we're not really getting an answer on what really is payments and what to budget, but
Let me give you-
you've beaten it to death, so I'll hear it again.
Let me put this, I'm happy to talk about this because, let me put this into perspective as it relates to where you are right now with this, okay? It was conceived with all good intentions. Putting solar panels on the schools, there would be savings, there were guarantees put in place, to the extent that you had savings, it would go against the bond payment, and the guarantee would make up the shortfall. And it wasn't supposed to reduce your expenditures, but it wasn't supposed to increase your expenditures. And to your point, when you look at fiscal 20, your electrical costs went from 40,000 to $1 million and change because there were $400,000 worth of payments remitted by the school district to the town to offset the bond payment as a result of delays in permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Going forward, we've drawn a line in the sand in this budget. What we're saying is, look, if the premise was to take a baseline year, let's pick 2019, pre-COVID, pre-solar panels, pre-everything, escalated 3% a year, there's a schedule in here that does that. Your budget costs for fiscal '23 are $833,000. That's what we are going to spend, and if we don't spend it giving it to Eversource, if we spend $600, we'll give $233 to the town the way we were supposed to. As it relates to the $326,000 that cumulatively we believe that the town owes us for making payments against a bond issue that doesn't belong to the Board of Education, what I would focus on, me personally, is getting the town's head wrapped around the idea of fixing the budget going forward. I'm happy to speak with Mr. Sawicki, I'm happy to speak with Mr. Gomez about this budget, I'm happy to show them schedules, I'm happy to go through the numbers with them, I'm happy to have them ask me a zillion questions and say, how did you get these numbers, and what do they mean, and because 90% of this budget is statutory, okay? It's either teacher contract, somebody's contract, this, that, or the other thing, all of which are fixed. There's very little discretionary money in this budget. I would rather go in and say, I know you haven't had your questions answered in the past because I've heard this. I'm happy to answer all your questions, and to the extent the Board of Education wants me to be the emissary, I'm happy to sit here all day long and go through the process on your behalf. And get people to where they actually believe what they're looking at, where they actually believe these are the numbers. That we
These
don't
are
have
the
a
actual figures.
we don't have a secret stash of money under the desk. We don't have bake sales. To your point, there is no other pot of money. There is a town-financed budget of which the Board of Education represents, in my opinion, a slightly less than proportionate amount as compared to, say, some other towns who spend more money on education. So, if you're going to try to get someone to support you, I believe the best way for us to go about doing that is to align our interests with their interests and say, this is what it's going to cost to do this. We have to educate the Board of Ed, the things you were never told. We have to do the same thing with the town. We have to do it with the taxpayers. Ultimately, I've never met a parent who didn't want the best for their child. And so at the end of the day, if what you say is, this is what it's going to cost to educate your child, no kidding, this is the real number, and this is what it costs, and I'm sorry, we've been sort of lagging the expenditures for a few years, and you've had the benefit of that in lower taxes or constant taxes, but now it's time to ante up. All you can do is say, this is the information, and at the end of the day, then maybe they'll get their heads wrapped around it, or say no. But the problem I see as an outsider coming in is there seems to be a lack of credibility surrounding some of this stuff, and now I see why. And I think if we can overcome part of that problem, we present the budget the way it is written, with the educational needs in it, some of which are not even provided for, but you can maybe mix and match a little if you get the increase you need. And then you get on a track to where you say, going forward now, we're going to basically have the increases that we have, and we're not going to be paying for things that are legendary. It's like buying a co-op in New York, they never fixed the roof, and now you got the assessment. I mean, that's kind of what this is like. And, I've got a lot of presentations, and I generally find that if you can develop some credibility, if you can develop, give people the ability to look at it and believe it, it helps them make a tough decision. And this is a very tough decision. And to your point, Mr. Garofalo, yes, it's a 4-step process. And I suppose you just take every step of every process, or every step of the process individually as you move through it, and hope to develop momentum. So when you finally get to the end, you've got and what you need to get the job
And,
done.
and like you said, the first priority is to continue with the quality education system that is second to none, and the children are the top priority. And just roll up our sleeves and go for it and keep pushing.
So I asked for this historical view that starts right after the current budget, right, so it's right up the
Right.
front. I love it, I love it, I love it, thank you. Get a big historical view, have it up on top, but I'm really craving to see that electricity line item, 2 sublines under there that says payment to Eversource, payment down. No, I know they're there, I want them here.
I can put.
Because that's where
I
people
can
will
see it.
really, really
Yeah,
see
you're on
it.
another page.
Like, because when you see the 187,000 that we were over on 119, right? And also for that, like, well, where did that go? Where did that go? And I think that's actually even different than breaking out the, because even if, like, I'll just ask, where did that money go?
Yeah, we-
Where's the
What
$187,000
you are
go?
looking at?
Which has nothing to do with
Oh,
what you're saying, I believe.
Yeah, there was a surplus back there that, well, I know it went. Went to the town. Because when the town balances the budget at the end of the year, by the way, as they did at the end of last year, when it was $137,000, that $137,000 was applied against a solar bond payment. It's part of, there's a schedule in here under the electrical analysis section that shows that last year, $290,000 was paid in connection with bond payments over and above electrical usage costs. Of that 290,000, 137,000 represented the supposed surplus that existed in the budget as of June 30th. And the other 158,000 was paid out of, I'm not exactly sure where it came from. But see, last year, here's what happened. There was a substantial surplus in salaries. And so,
I mean, yeah, so many times.
Yeah.
So many times.
but I mean, and so what happened was it covered the $550,000 deficiency in,
At that time,
that existed last year. There was a
it was covered.
300 and, there was another negative item, professional development was like, the long and the short of it is, it was a home run year because you closed the schools.
For so many
So-
months.
Closing the schools shouldn't be the answer to solving your budget problems.
No, we're doing remote teaching now.
Can I
It's
just
not.
clarify, so in 2019-20, we ended with a surplus of almost $90,000.
$189,000, yeah.
That was just taken back from the state. In 2000, but to this town, sorry. In 2020-21, there was actually a $290,000 surplus, but we don't see that in the same way because they put it right up into the electricity.
Right.
Which is very deceptive, and that's why I think it's critical for us to see those 2 extra rows on this
Well,
table.
I'll just put a second line, one will be electrical usage, the other one will be electrical flow, or whatever.
Electrical usage and payment to town
Payment to-
for solar.
So,
Yeah,
I understand completely, I don't know what happened, and by the way,
Probably have to do
there was
it.
also 400, if you look at the $1,034,000 that's in there for, 2020? Yeah, 2020, it was 414,000 in that $1 million number.
Mm.
That was part of the solar payment. And then part of the 21 number is 290,000. And so far, part of this year is 260.
60.
So,
It's
which by the way,
$577,000.
certainly doesn't help our
payment a
budget
year.
deficit,
So,
because I'm projecting based on, what we have to continue to pay to keep the lights on.
so in this year's 622, this year's. Do you have some payment into the town here or
No.
no? Okay, no.
No.
So we truly expect to write a cut to Eversource in the amount of $800,033.
Yeah, here,
Okay.
this is the page for this,
Yeah,
for this year, the 833,530.
Perfect,
If you look at the schedule that I did
yeah.
attached to it, all I did was extrapolate the baseline by
Yeah,
another
got it.
3%, and I ignored all of this other stuff. and said, it's 833, whatever we save, and whatever we save, we'll give you, but it's 833 is the budget, which, by the way, is, some $90,000 more than where we started in 2019 with the baseline.
Okay, great.
So, again, I don't know how to have a conversation about this with the town, because I don't have enough authority or facts to be able to have a meaningful conversation on how we solve this problem. But I believe the town's position from my discussions is, you're on the hook for the solar project, and I'm like, I'll pay for anything you want as long as you give me the money. And there seems to be a disconnect in that logic.
Well, I mean, I think this is the time, it's gonna come up organically as part of this budget
It
conversation.
is.
And this is a time to work it out and to
Yes.
Right, so
join
there-
hand in hand with the town and the Board of Ed, the solar project, and the situation moving forward, that we've paid a certain amount, we need to move forward and only pay the 3% of of what the guy from Johnson Controls got up and said about the formula. He mentioned the actual cost plus the 3%, but,
So
it's
there's-
one pot of money, right? It's the town's pot of money, and it's just, we've got to come together and get this worked.
I mean, the good news is the solar panels are on. They were turned on in July. We are hopefully currently in the mode of saving money, which will be applied against the town's bond costs relating to the bond that floated. And Johnson Controls will make good on their guarantee to fund any shortfall based on credits they received from the state, I believe. And going forward, we're not going to continue to have this problem. What gave rise to this problem was the 2-year delay in obtaining permits under which Johnson Controls said we can't get at the guarantee money, and so therefore you have to pay us.
And that was a problem.
And
The
so-
town and for
And the
us.
question then became was, well, who's we? And, it's a negotiation to sort out, because I mean, you can look for minutes, you can look for this, you can look for that, but the problem is the principals who designed this aren't here to speak of it. And,
And it was in good intention that they.
I think it should be the broader
roof
conversation of how we
replacement.
move forward.
And they did roof replacement, boiler
Exactly.
repairs, whatever, but a $9 million cost.
Right.
Which, by the way, we contributed through grants. There was $6 million contributed into the $15 million project from the school district, from grants that we received, and I guess in connection with improving the infrastructure of these buildings. That's how the town only floated $9 million.
And they got it down to 9 million. That's
So-
the first select woman explained that pretty
Yeah.
thoroughly, that part. Yes, she did.
We have 4 pieces to the solar, right? Are we getting money back from the town? I don't know who puts that question for this fiscal year. Are we in agreement that anything over the 830 and anything under 830 goes to the town? And then what happens if we're over that?
Well, and what happens if Eversource raises it like 10%, 12%?
Right.
Again, that's not contemplated in this budget, okay? And it's a larger question as it relates to, that's why this conversation really, everything's gotta go on the table here. And let's talk about the competing issues that the town has and the Board of Ed have with each other, and things that need to get resolved, so that perhaps we can strike a balance of letting bygones be bygones, and how do we move forward, and we get a budget. I don't know how this town works, honestly, but I know how I operated in business, private business, which is you get in a room and you hopefully walk out with an agreement, and not everybody gets what they want, but they at least got what they need. And, and maybe I'm naive thinking that works, I don't know.
My question would be, who does that sit down and talk about it? You know yourself, the more the merrier doesn't work with something like this. So for the Board of Ed in entirety and the Board of Finance together is not gonna solve that. It's got to be leadership
On both sides.
on both sides with town treasurer, Bill Sawicki, and it has to be a smaller, and then people say you're not being transparent. No, you're gonna get something done. You can't have 30 heads talking around the thing. You need to have 5 or 6 heads talking about it and say, let's cut to the quick. That's where it's gotta go, and it can't be, cause you and I, you as the finance chair, we've seen that game played before, and we do know that when I spoke the last time I was as board chair to a certain board member, he said that Ed was chastising him like he would chastise kids when he was a principal. And I was just reminding them of what we do, our obligation, board is to advocate for the kids of the town.
And you know, to your point, Ed, that doesn't happen when you're in a meeting with 5 to 7 people around a table like that. That happens in a forum where we're presenting, and you're an educator, so you talk like a teacher. I mean, that's like to be expected, and that's what the different dynamic is when we're standing up in that formal presentation
Yeah.
mode versus when we're collaborating as people all with the same goal.
I think it can be worked out. I think what you've said is excellent. The smaller the group and.
I mean, I am not a member of the Board of Education. I have a limited amount of authority. I have only the authority you give me. I would,
No, but you're a resource.
I will,
And that's an important thing.
I will do whatever.
And I will do also as if directed by
To have
the
these
board
conversations,
and
I've
with the
developed,
board member present.
a good
to
relationship
have
with Mr.
board
Sawicki.
members.
He's an intelligent man. We're both CPAs. He has an appreciation for numbers. I have negotiated some very large deals in my lifetime, and I do it in good faith. And what I would do is I would say that, again, like I said earlier, it's an educational process at first to be able to define the problem, and then the second part of it is, okay, how do we get out of this? Because we're in this together, okay? This isn't a town problem or a BOE problem. This
It's the
is,
same direct
It's all one
money.
pot.
Yes.
it's how do we move the ball forward, given the town's other priorities that they have. One piece of which, of course, the very largest piece of which is the BOE budget.
Yeah. Kristen had something?
I just want to take us in another direction as we tell the story of this budget. What's really sticking out to me is the historical and projected enrollment. When you look from, I'm in section
4, I think.
three, several pages back. But when you look from 2010 to 2020, we had declining enrollment. So we
Yes.
were able to handle minimal increases because we had less kids. When you look at the projection from 2020 to 2030, it really holds even.
Yes.
So I think that's important to get out there.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, been so quiet.
I've been so quiet, I've been thinking, I'm a thinker.
This is the projected enrollment, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that, first of all, I agree that let's go in with what we need to keep the lights on. I think it's important. I think you've heard from other board members that we know there's gonna be, if it's not already here today, a greater need for services within our school districts. I think for me, as a board member, I wanna get this behind us as quickly as we can. And I know we've got a lot of hurdles to jump. But for me, when I think about budgets and resources for schools, it's gotta come down to what our strategic objectives for the district are. We haven't talked about achievement, we haven't talked about critical thinking skills, we haven't talked about how social and emotional wellness as it ties to the financial resources needed to prepare those and really to set measures of those objectives. I'm very hopeful that we can do that at our retreat, maybe not the first one, but the second one, and think about what does it look like, how do we define success for the school district?
Exactly, and the goals and also
And
tied in with, even
so,
with the PowerPoint next
As much
Monday,
as I
emphasizing.
respect is how awful this budget
Yeah.
is, we've gotta keep it at least, gotta keep the lights on. because we have a whole lot more work to do in terms of where we're headed, 5 years out, 10 years out, in those objectives I talked about, but also just, I'm an engineer, right, our infrastructure, our schools, we haven't even talked about capital needs.
I wrote that down.
5-year plan.
I
So-
wrote it down and I just crossed it off because I was like, I don't have the bandwidth for it, the mental capacity. Seriously.
Sure. But we're not
That's
gonna
right.
answer all the questions
Right.
tonight, and I don't think this is the budget session to do it in this year. We really just have to
That's why
kind
we
of,
didn't.
we have to keep the ship afloat, is what I'm hearing tonight. Because we've got a whole lot more work to do, once we do that. And if we're continually distracted by keeping the ship afloat, we're never gonna move forward. And personally, Dr. Compton, that's one of the reasons why I was such a fan of yours, is because I
Yes.
believe it can take us there with
And
your
that's truly
experience.
what our number one goal is student
And we've gotta
achievement.
help
And
you do
second, the
that.
social and emotional learning and the support system. I mean, it has to be a priority, and looking specifically at the goals of how we're gonna support the staff, the students, and everybody.
And I think the
alongside
sooner
those goals.
we can we need you to be doing those types of things and not
Instead of
worry
here.
about, whether the lights are really gonna be on tomorrow or not, and so I'm really hopeful that this board can support this budget, that our taxpayers can support this budget, understanding that we really are trying to get that boulder up the hill and not have it come crashing down. But I really want us to kind of put this behind us sooner rather than later, so we can talk about all those other things we should be talking
What
about.
we're really here for, and it's about student achievement.
So, that's.
Well, and it's my job to be distracted with this. That's why I'm here. I'm not an educator,
Yeah,
and my job is to free up Dr. Compton and the other educators in the district from having to deal with these issues that perhaps they got involved in because there wasn't a business manager and they had to do something. But, it's not my job to pass this off on anybody else. I feel that we can find ways to solve these problems in the short term and then hopefully find a permanent solution so that you can stay focused on it, and so maybe, have to get a life and,
and lastly, I forgot, and I apologize, I didn't say this, but thank you to Dr. Compton and your entire team for, I know this has been
Everybody's worked
everybody.
diligently,
So I
Salvatore, we've
really
spent
appreciate-
many nights here, the entire team,
Everybody's
everybody's been
gone
through.
above and beyond.
The administrative
to get
staff,
this straightened out.
Leanne has just, it's been a team effort. It's been unbelievable. He worked the entire weekend. We've been here evening after evening. And this is what tonight we wanted to present. Everything that we thought you wanted to have in regards to a budget in every analysis that we could show you.
I want to build on what Beth was saying, the conversations that we haven't had about what we would really need to, we really haven't started that in these initial requests for administration, and that might be a soft way to kind of point out that in an ideal world, these are the things we would be asking for.
Yes.
Can we put some dollar numbers against that?
Some of that, yes.
Just to have it be illustrative, because when we look at this.
Where you'd like to go 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Things you'd like to have in place.
Yeah, and also to recognize that, CLS didn't have anything here, not because he didn't think it was needed, but because he.
Because he just felt so bad about asking for it.
Yeah, exactly.
He really did. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm
Mary Sue had no such problem.
Mary Sue had,
No such problem.
as I always say, Mary Sue will definitely give you a list of quality.
They all want what's best.
So did Mr. Freud and Mrs. Roden, but
With
they
the
just.
exception of the one clerical position, every single one of these things speaks to that's what you were saying, and they all have social emotional component. I mean,
Yes.
anytime you see an expansion into career and technology education at the high school level, you can't decouple social emotional and academic for positions like this. The reach teacher, same thing. Psychologist, same thing. So I think it would be wonderful to put some numbers against this and be like, hey, if we were really talking to you about what our kids need, it would be a minimum of that, and then we would have gone back to Chatfield and to SMS and said, what do you
Right.
really want? And
Absolutely beautiful. Then another thing too, as
it's
you
subtle,
said,
you know what I
another
mean? They see
a
it and
second
they're like,
retreat in prioritizing what student achievement and what these goals.
Jim, you wanna go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I think we need to include, because we used to before,
there used to be a list, and I don't know where it is anymore. There used to be a list that showed the town's ability to pay taxes and where they fit. For example, they used to say that we could fund it at, we should have funded it, we were the 118th town, when we should have been the 100th,
The listing.
108th town. We were 10 below our ability to pay, so that the people understand. And then the other thing is parents need to support the budget. History does not show that. If we look at the numbers of the voting people, and you were to look, there.
Well, not to interrupt, but even last year was, the turnout was dismal.
Absolutely.
We weren't asking for anything more than.
That's why it was dismal,
Oh,
because nobody was fighting against
Yeah,
it.
and I think-
That's probably, but we still.
But it was still close.
Yeah,
It was still
Oh, it was
dangerously
still
close.
But see, that behooves us, because like I mentioned once before, and I'm trying to find documentation
Yeah.
for Susan. As the superintendent, there's rules about how much she can advocate for the budget, because it directly impacts her salary. So she has to be careful, even to the point of sending flyers out from the school and stuff like that. It has to come from PTOs and PTAs, and it has to come from the general public. It could come from us, advocate, and I remember back when Paul Roy and I were involved, and I was the chair at the time, we sent a joint letter to the people supporting both budgets, the town budget and the education budget. And it was signed by Paul and I advocating for the people. I don't think it worked, but at least we tried it.
Yeah.
And, it coming out because, you have the board chair and the first select person advocating for the passing of both budgets, because you know what happens. We don't wanna have that fight where we're gonna pass the town budget and we're not gonna pass the school budget, and we know that's happened. It's happened when we had a zero increase. Yeah, we had to go, and we had to make some changes with a zero increase.
We actually.
And I'm not trying to be negative,
Yeah.
but we gotta push.
I would,
No, go ahead.
you were next.
No, that's all right.
I would add, we had a year where it passed, I think it was by one vote. I think it was only one vote that the school budget passed. I go back to last year when we were trying to reopen, and we heard from them, and we were on Zoom every meeting, that public comment was filled with parents who were engaged, who were great advocates for their kid and their children. And if we can harness that, and if we can get those parents and the ones who just listened but didn't speak at public comment, we can do this. We need to do this.
Yeah, and keeping with the YouTube and all of that, more people will see these meetings than they will, because obviously we only have two fine people from the public here, but I don't know what Derek's count is right now, but I'm sure there's some viewers out there.
They're saying how open that we are, and everything has been brought to the table, and we want to do what's best for kids and to move this, as Mr. Finella said, the budget along.
I'm sorry, am I allowed to say something?
As-
No.
We'll get you in a couple
Yeah.
minutes, we're gonna try and wrap this up, because I think we're all on the same page. Jim?
I was going to focus on communication. Now, the ideas that have been presented tonight in terms of what we should be looking for at our retreat and so forth. I lament the fact that we don't get regular newspapers anymore, and that few people subscribe to print media in any way. They sit in front of the TV, or they're on YouTube, or they perhaps may listen to the radio on occasion. But when we had newspapers, there were articles on education. There were articles, feature or otherwise, informing the general public about what was going on in the schools, what the budget considerations were, and so forth. But we don't have that for the most part today. So it becomes a greater challenge for us. How do we convince those out there, our voters, to make them understand in a much better fashion exactly what's happening in the schools, what our needs are, and we can't move forward without general population support. And that is a challenge. Your committee, Dr. Compton, is, I think, a wonderful idea. But I don't know that that would go far enough.
No, it's
And I'm just
just
at
a
a loss.
portion, right.
I'm at a loss, I'm not a
Yeah,
great idea.
PTOs and other
How we could do
avenues,
that.
parents, groups.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Dr. Compton, if you were in my head, if Dr. Compton could do some silly TikTok about the budget. I mean, you might get the 12-year-olds, but, you know, it might be something where, I don't know if we reach out to folks at the Valley Indy, or if we push Facebook,
Facebook's
a couple
one.
days
Social
here,
media.
you know, not just once, but hit them every day. You know, voices, I don't know if they'd be willing to come down here and have an interview with you. You know, you're right, it's no longer print media, it's digital media.
Right.
It's, you know, we don't even have, you probably remember the Channel 10 or whatever, the
Yeah,
public
yeah,
access,
yeah.
the
What are you looking at me?
telemedia, what is it?
You looking at the old guy, go ahead.
No, I think
Go ahead.
everybody here, we had that public access TV, and I don't even think that's a thing anymore.
No,
Yeah,
that's,
it's public access, yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
But nobody broadcast
Nobody
like
broadcast.
content from
No, nobody would,
Comcast, because I did one of those with, I can't remember if it was with Bill Swicky or if it was with,
Well, yeah. And just to follow up your point, and I've spoken to Anne Marie about it, I mean, the print media, the whatever Republican, doesn't even list when we vote for our budget. But they'll do Oxford. And I challenged them, and Anne Marie said she was gonna do a letter to their editor, to see where their, you know, subscription is more in Oxford than it is in Seymour. And I challenge that, but they'll cover Oxford's junk, excuse me, but they won't cover our good stuff. You know, so get rid of the Republican. The only good thing is about the high school sports, that's about it. That's the only thing. Go ahead.
All right, so I think everybody's on the same page. I know Jay had a track meet he had to be at tonight. I know Stefan is
Out of town.
out of town for work. You know, I think the 7 of us that are here are on the same page, right? I don't know if we want to entertain a motion without Jay and Stefan looking at it. We don't have a
I
motion
think
on the
Monday
table.
night, if you can, parents are welcome to come back at the middle school.
Yeah, we'll be
What
there.
time?
6
Same
o'clock.
6 o'clock Monday, okay.
I don't know if anybody
Our
has,
principals, administrators will be there, and
I mean,
do the video.
when I look at this cell, it's really nothing that I've ever seen before. It's got a lot of meat to it. I got this early afternoon. I'll be honest, I didn't get a chance to go through every page. But the data
It's a lot of
here-
numbers.
Yeah, and I'm a numbers guy and I like it. You make finance make sense for me somewhat.
I think this is what Mrs. Harmley wanted, because she kept saying specifically
I,
with
I,
a lot of
I did, but I will be honest, I do still have a running
She
list
wants-
of.
she wants
more.
requests.
Yeah.
And one of them
Running
is
list, somebody-
exactly, one of them is exactly what Ed already said.
Okay.
So, I can share that now, or I can do it.
How about we do this? Maybe an email to
Yeah.
Sal. We'll bring
That
it up
works.
next
Yeah,
week when Stefan and
works.
Jay are here.
That works.
We
Um,
trust
Wanna
you.
compile all the questions?
Yes,
or-
send all your questions to me, maybe
Yeah,
like
I'll
you
do
did
that,
before.
yeah.
And then,
I'll send it to you and any thoughts and what numbers we'd like to see that aren't here.
Well,
Yeah.
and some of it, by the way, is just regurgitating the data in the fashion that you would like it.
Correct.
We have, all the data is here. It's been uncovered, I've got it going back as far as 2018, 19, okay?
We can go back.
I'll be happy to, if you send me an email with the collective questions, I'll respond back to you with the answers. You know, as much as I can provide you so you can be properly informed and then in a way that you process data. Not everybody processes data the same way.
That's why we want it electronically as well as a notebook, both ways. Because it's a lot of information.
Not that did forget Excel files. I'm just teaching you.
No.
I said to Beth, did we get Excel files?
You can't have my Excel file unless you promise not to
If you
ruin
want
it.
me to build some PowerPoints for a presentation to PTAs, I'm gonna need your
Okay,
Excel
well-
files.
That'd be awesome.
Okay,
Yes,
fine.
absolutely.
I'll give you a copy.
So why don't we do this? Say by midday Thursday, have all your questions, but as they come in, I'll log them and send them to you as I get them. And then, you know, I don't really, well, if you gotta work over the weekend, you do, but I think you put in a lot of time this weekend.
Why would I take a weekend off?
Good idea.
I'm prepared to go to, let's go to the meeting on February the 2nd, let's do our presentation, and let's, to Beth's point, let's try to get this behind us so we can get on to the more important stuff. And if it's pedal to the metal until then that's what it is. Let's just, you know, I'm committed, I'm in this far, I'm committed to getting to the finish line. Otherwise, it was all for naught. And we don't have that option. You don't have that option.
We've been looking at this since November, the end of November.
I had about 15-20 minute honeymoon.
Coming in.
Coming in the door.
That long?
It was that long, yeah.
Technically, I think it was like a negative something, because you really started before you started.
I actually started the night before, that's right.
You gonna try to see if you can do that summit kind of thing or not?
The summit? What do you mean?
Well, when I said, 30 head versus less number of heads,
Tomorrow we have a little chat. Correct, is it tomorrow? Friday, no?
There's, only thing I know is they have well, that's actually a full committee.
Oh,
No,
okay.
they need to arrange a small gathering, like you said.
Bill Sawicki invited me to participate in a Zoom call tomorrow night.
But that's a whole finance committee, though. We're talking about the very small group. That's gotta be arranged, like you said.
Yeah, we could set that up.
Oh, okay.
Maybe Kristen and me
Yeah.
and Sal and
That'd be
Dr.
good,
Compton.
Yeah.
Or if you wanna have the whole finance committee, I don't think the rest of us would object to that, or if you just wanna do Kristen and you and,
That's
well, I'll leave it.
always well.
You're the chair, so that could be
You wanna-
technically an ad hoc committee that you could
Do you want to
have.
see their availability this week? Is that something you can?
Yeah, we'll check on that.
We might wanna wait until after we do our workshop, do our budget presentation, and see what kind of reaction we get.
Okay.
I think that's excellent, right, to get through that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sit down
so
and
wait.
talk about the.
Yeah, because typically what happens is, right, we'll do our budget presentation, whether it's February 2nd or whatever, and the Board of Finance will ask questions, but there will be no action. Nor will they even give us typically a kind of a, what they're thinking. But then there's another set of meetings with the Board of Finance when they're actually voting on what they want the budget to be. So sometime between our initial budget presentation and when we know they're gonna vote, and offer to have a working session to get more in depth and add, respond to more in-depth questions as they've gone through the cycle a little bit more, I think would
In
be.
February
Here's
2nd,
the
we'll
time.
probably get a good pulse on how they're feeling.
You never know,
You never know, right?
you never know.
Hopefully Chris was on that board
Yeah.
for a while.
But sometimes it's literally a, thank you very much.
Right.
I don't know what 6.8 if you're gonna get a thank you very much.
4.5.
Yeah. 4.5.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
I just want to say thank you tonight for the great collaborative input and sharing and support of each other and just supporting what's best for the kids of Seymour. Thank you to our parents. It's been a long process, we know we're getting near the finish line of trying to put together the rest for you.
All right, quarter 8, anything else? We have the report section, I'm not gonna talk anymore, do you have anything else?
No.
Okay, public comment, I know one of you
Oh,
has.
you guys pretty much answered it.
Okay,
But the one thing I will say is you guys really do need to look into the special ed department. Like I'm begging you, there is a huge problem at Sheffield, the Cresty, a huge problem.
I took the notes down.
Well, I know you already know.
I would just like to also comment that I know sometimes budget and money equates with effective instruction, and I think that that doesn't always equate. I think that, to your point, that we really need to look at instruction in this district overall, leadership, and how this instruction is being implemented. As an educator, I've seen a lot of issues with instruction, and it's disheartening, because, you know, as a parent, and I've heard many board members talk about how parents don't come out and vote. I think maybe if you firmed up the things that don't cost money, that maybe parents might be more apt to come out and vote for a budget, because, you know, I think a lot of parents are asked to fund the budget, and, you know, every year, obviously, as the budget grows and, you know, more money is required, I think that parents need to see what is being done with the money currently, and to show that it is quality instruction. And then I think more people will be apt to come out and vote for additional funding.
And I'd also like to schedule a meeting with both of you, and we can gather more input.
Absolutely.
And we can share more as well, okay?
I love
That
that.
will do.
I would love that, thank you.
All right. I don't think we have any more, but public comment, going once, public comment going twice. Public comment closed.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's the best thing I heard all day.
Yeah.